We briefly discussed disk encryption earlier when we talked about encryption at a high level. Now it's time to dive deeper. Full disk encryption, or FDE, is an important factor in a defense in-depth security model. It provides protection from some physical forms of attack. As an IT support specialist, you likely assist with implementing an FDE solution if one doesn't exist already, help with migrating between FDE solutions, and troubleshoot issues with FDE systems, like helping with forgotten passwords. So FDE is key. Systems with their entire hard drives encrypted are resilient against data theft. They'll prevent an attacker from stealing potentially confidential information from a hard drive that's been stolen or lost. Without also knowing the encryption password or having access to the encryption key, the data on the hard drive is just meaningless gibberish. This is a very important security mechanism to deploy for more mobile devices, like laptops, cell phones, and tablets. But it's also recommended for desktops and servers too, since disk encryption not only provides confidentiality, but also integrity. This means that an attacker with physical access to a system can't replace system files with malicious ones or install malware. Having the disk fully encrypted protects from data theft and unauthorized tampering, even if an attacker has physical access to the disk. But in order for a system to boot if it has an FDE setup, there are some critical files that must be accessible. They need to be available before the primary disk can be unlocked and the boot process can continue. Because of this, all FDE setups have an unencrypted partition on the disk which holds these critical boot files. Examples include things like the kernel and bootloader that are critical to booting the operating system. These files are actually vulnerable to being replaced with modified, potentially malicious files by an attacker with physical access. While it's possible to compromise a machine this way, it would take a sophisticated and determined attacker to do it. There's also protection against this attack in the form of the Secure Boot Protocol, which is part of the UEFI specification. Secure Boot uses public key cryptography to secure these encrypted elements of the boot process. It does this by integrated code signing and verification of the boot files. Initially, Secure Boot is configured with what's called a platform key, which is the public key corresponding to the private key used to sign the boot files. This platform key is written to firmware and is used at boot time to verify the signature of the boot files. Only files correctly signed and trusted will be allowed to execute. This way, a secure boot protects against physical tampering with the unencrypted boot partition. There are first-party full disk encryption solutions from Microsoft and Apple, called BitLocker and FileVault 2, respectively. There are also a bunch of third-party and open-source solutions. On Linux, the dmcrypt package is super popular. There are also solutions from PGP, TrueCrypt, VeriCrypt, and lots of others. Check out the supplementary readings for a detailed list of FDE tools. Just pick your poison, or antidote, I should say. Full disk encryption schemes rely on a secret key for actual encryption and decryption operations. They typically password protect access to this key, and in some cases, the actual encryption key is used to derive a user key, which is then used to encrypt the master key. If the encryption key needs to be changed, the user key can be swapped out without requiring a full decryption and re-encryption of the data being protected. This would be necessary if the master encryption key needs to be changed. Password protecting the key works by requiring the user enter a passphrase to unlock the encryption key. It can then be used to access the protected contents on the disk. In many cases, this might be the same as the user account password to keep things simple and to reduce the number of passwords to memorize. When you implement a full disk encryption solution at scale, it's super important to think about how to handle cases where passwords are forgotten. This is another convenience trade-off when using FDE. If the passphrase is forgotten, then the contents of the disk aren't recoverable. Yikes! This is why lots of enterprise disk encryption solutions have a key escrow functionality. Key escrow allows the encryption key to be securely stored for later retrieval by an authorized party. So if someone forgets the passphrase to unlock their encrypted disk for their laptop, The system's administrators are able to retrieve the escrow key or recovery passphrase to unlock the disk. It's usually a separate key or passphrase that can unlock the disk in addition to the user-defined one. This allows for recovery if a password is forgotten. The recovery key is used to unlock the disk and boot the system fully. You should compare full disk encryption against file-based encryption. That's where only some files or folders are encrypted and not the entire disk. This is usually implemented as home directory encryption. It serves a slightly different purpose compared to FDE. Home directory or file-based encryption only guarantees confidentiality and integrity of files protected by encryption. These setups usually don't encrypt system files because there are often compromises between security and usability. When the whole disk isn't encrypted, it's possible to remotely reboot a machine without being locked out. If you reboot a full disk encrypted machine, the disk unlock password must be entered before the machine finishes booting and is reachable over the network again. So while file-based encryption is a little more convenient, it's less protected against physical attacks. An attacker could modify or replace core system files and compromise the machine to gain access to the encrypted data. This is a good example of why understanding threats and the risks these threats represent is an important part in designing a security architecture and choosing the right defenses. In our next lesson, we'll cover application hardening. I'll see you there.